The hands that once held my wedding ring were now typing filth to my son's wife, planning to steal everything I owned. They thought I was a fragile old woman, but they forgot one thing. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. If you believe in justice, like this video and subscribe, because you need to hear how I burned their world to the ground. The day my world shattered began with the scent of brewing coffee and the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the mundane soundtrack to a life I thought was perfect. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the marble countertops that Tom, my husband of 40 years, had insisted on when we renovated. "Only the best for you, Linda," he'd said, his voice a warm, familiar melody. That melody had become the background music of my life, a comforting tune I never thought would end. Our son, Michael, was grown and married, with a life of his own. But our home, this beautiful 2-story coastal house just outside Seattle, was still our sanctuary. It was a house built not just with wood and nails, but with decades of shared laughter, quiet compromises, and what I believed was unwavering love. Tom had left his phone on the charger by the coffee machine, a common occurrence. He was getting forgetful in his retirement, a charming flaw, I'd thought. I moved it aside to clean under it when the screen lit up. A message from Rachel, our daughter-in-law. My first instinct was warmth. I adored Rachel. She was the daughter I never had, a vibrant, intelligent woman who had made our Michael so happy. The preview on the screen read, "He's still asleep. I can't stop thinking about last night." My heart gave a little lurch. An odd message. I thought, maybe she sent it to Tom by mistake, meaning to send it to Michael? They were visiting her parents for the weekend. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone. It felt wrong, a violation of trust, but a cold, sharp feeling, like a needle of ice sliding into my gut, urged me on. Tom's passcode was our anniversary date. How cliché, how sickeningly ironic. My finger hovered over the numbers, a silent prayer on my lips. Please, let this be a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. I tapped in the date, and the phone opened to a string of messages that made the air leave my lungs. They weren't just messages. They were a chronicle of a passionate, long-running affair. Explicit photos, declarations of a love that was so much more real than what they had with us, plans for a future together. They talked about me. They called me the old woman, a fragile piece of porcelain that would soon crack and be swept away. They talked about Michael, my sweet boy, with a detached pity that made my blood run cold. He was a stepping stone, a necessary inconvenience. But the part that stopped my breath, the part that turned the ice in my gut into a raging inferno, was the discussion of finances. The Shell Corporation is set up. Tom had written just 2 days ago. Once Linda signs the new estate planning documents, the house will be effectively transferred. She won't suspect a thing. She trusts me completely. Rachel's reply, "I can't wait to redecorate. Get rid of all her old lady floral patterns. You and I, in our house. Finally. Our house." The words echoed in the sudden roaring silence of my kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled, finishing its cycle, and the sound was unnervingly loud. I looked around at the walls I had painted, the floors I had scrubbed, the windows I had looked through every morning for 30 years. Each object was a memory, a testament to a life I had built with a man who was now a stranger, a monster wearing my husband's face. They weren't just stealing my husband and my son's wife. They were stealing my home, my security, my entire past and future. I placed the phone back on the charger, my movements precise and unnaturally calm. A strange clarity washed over me. The shock was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest, but beneath it, something else was stirring. something hard and cold and sharp. I thought of the porcelain vase on the mantelpiece, a wedding gift from my mother. It looked beautiful and delicate, but if it shattered, the shards would be sharp enough to cut. They thought I was a fragile old woman. They had no idea how sharp my broken pieces could be. I heard the floorboards creak upstairs. Tom was waking up. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed my apron, and forced my face into a neutral, placid expression. The performance of my life was about to begin. I walked through the rooms of my house that afternoon like a ghost, an unseen observer in the museum of my own life. Every object screamed betrayal. The large, framed photograph on the mantelpiece, taken on our 30th anniversary, was a masterpiece of deceit. There we were, Tom with his arm around me, his smile broad and seemingly genuine, Michael and a beaming Rachel standing beside us. We looked like the perfect American family, the kind you see in advertisements for life insurance. Now, I saw the truth. I saw the way Rachel's hand rested just a little too familiarly on Tom's arm, the way his eyes held a secret glint that I had mistaken for pride. How had I been so blind? The answer was simple. I had been willfully blind. I had invested 40 years of my life, my youth, my energy, into the belief that this family was my greatest achievement. I had given up a promising career as a legal aid to raise Michael. I hosted every Thanksgiving, every Christmas. I remembered every birthday, every anniversary. I was the keeper of our family's stories, the glue that held everything together. I had sacrificed pieces of myself, willingly and lovingly, to build this life. And for what? To be discarded like a piece of outdated furniture, my old lady floral patterns mocked by the viper I had welcomed into my home. I sank into the worn leather armchair in the living room, the one where I had rocked Michael to sleep as a baby, the one where Tom and I had sat for countless evenings, reading and talking. I could almost feel the phantom weight of his hand on my shoulder, hear the murmur of his voice. The memories were so vivid, so deeply ingrained in the fabric of my being, that untangling them from the lies felt like tearing my own skin. I remembered our first date, a walk along the Seattle waterfront. He had promised me a life of adventure and devotion. I remembered our wedding day, the hopeful tremor in his voice as he said his vows. Were any of it real, or was I just a convenient, stable foundation upon which he could build his life until a younger, more exciting model came along? The pain was a physical entity, a tight, suffocating band around my chest. Grief came in waves, so powerful it buckled my knees. I wept for the man I thought I had married, for the love I thought we shared. I wept for my son, whose entire marriage was a sham, whose trust had been shattered by the two people he should have been able to count on the most. And I wept for myself, for the naive, trusting woman who had poured her entire heart into a beautiful, empty vessel. I was 62 years old, a retired teacher. What was I supposed to do? My world had been reduced to ashes. As the sun began to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the living room, I found myself staring at my reflection in the darkened glass of the window. I saw a woman with lines of laughter and worry etched around her eyes, with silver strands in her hair that marked the passage of time. But behind the grief, I saw something else flicker in her eyes, a spark. It was the reflection of the woman I used to be, before I became just Tom's wife or Michael's mother. The young woman who had been at the top of her class in paralegal studies, the one with a sharp, analytical mind who loved the intricate dance of law and justice. They called me a fragile piece of porcelain. They saw me as weak, emotional, and easily manipulated. They had forgotten who I was, and in their arrogance, they had given me a gift, a purpose. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in my stomach, but now it was mingled with something else, a slow, burning rage. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would not be swept away. I would be the architect of their ruin. The transition from heartbreak to cold fury was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, creeping freeze. For a few days, I moved through my life on autopilot, playing the part of the devoted wife. I made Tom his morning coffee, asked about his day, and listened to him talk about the stock market, all while a silent scream echoed in my mind. The performance was exhausting, but necessary. I needed them to believe I was oblivious, that I was the same trusting, slightly dotty Linda they had so thoroughly dismissed. Their comfort was my camouflage, the true catalyst. The thing that solidified my grief into a diamond-hard resolve came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Tom announced he was going to his golf club, a common excuse. I knew from the texts he was meeting Rachel at a hotel downtown. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I went to his study. It felt like a desecration, entering his private space with the intent to uncover more of his treachery. The room smelled of old books and his familiar, woodsy cologne, a scent that now made me feel nauseous. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but my legal training, dormant for decades, began to stir. If they had a shell corporation, there had to be a paper trail. Men like Tom, arrogant and self-assured, always get sloppy. I started with his desk, sifting through piles of bills and financial statements, and then I found it, tucked into a folder labeled Estate Planning. It was a document from a firm I'd never heard of, West Coast Holdings, LLC. The address was just a P.O. box, a classic shell. My hands were steady as I read through the incorporation papers. The sole signatories were Thomas Harper and Rachel Miller, her maiden name. A pathetic attempt to hide her identity that a first-year law student would see through. They were funneling money from our joint savings account into this LLC, small amounts over several months, designed to go unnoticed. And then I saw the draft of the document they wanted me to sign. It was disguised as a standard update to our family trust, something to simplify things for Michael in the future. But buried in the dense legal jargon was a clause that would transfer ownership of our primary residence, this house, into the trust, which was now controlled by West Coast Holdings. I sank into his leather office chair, the pages spread out before me. This was premeditated. This wasn't just a passionate affair that had spiraled out of control. This was a cold, calculated plot to strip me of everything I had spent my life building. They weren't just cheating on me and my son. They were planning to leave me homeless and penniless, a 62-year-old woman with a teacher's meager pension. They were going to erase me. The image of Rachel, smiling at me over dinner last week, asking if I needed help with the dishes, flashed in my mind. The memory of Tom, kissing my forehead that very morning and telling me he loved me, burned like acid. The sheer audacity, the depth of their cruelty, was breathtaking. The sorrow that had been my constant companion for days evaporated, replaced by something far more potent: fury. It was a clean, purifying fire, burning away the tears and the self-pity. There would be no screaming matches, no tearful confrontations. They didn't deserve the satisfaction of seeing my pain. What they deserved was a reckoning, a public, humiliating, and legally airtight destruction. I was no longer a grieving wife. I was an adversary. They had started a war. Assuming they were fighting a defenseless civilian, they were about to find out they had declared war on a strategist. I carefully photographed every single page of those documents with my phone, my mind already working, piecing together the first moves on a chessboard they didn't even know we were playing on. I would let them build their little house of cards, let them think they were winning. And then, at the moment of their greatest confidence, I would pull out the foundation and watch it all come crashing down. The first move of a queen is often quiet, almost imperceptible to her opponent. My first move was a phone call. I waited until the next day, when Tom and Rachel were both at work, a laughable concept now. I took a walk down to the waterfront, the salty air whipping at my face, feeling more clear-headed than I had in years. I sat on a bench overlooking Puget Sound and dialed a number I hadn't called in nearly a decade. Sarah Jensen. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, crisp, no nonsense, and sharp as a tack. Sarah, it's Linda Harper. There was a moment of surprised silence, then warmth. Linda, my God, it's been ages. How are you? How's Tom? The mention of his name was a small, sharp jab, but I kept my voice even. I'm the reason I'm calling, actually, and it's about Tom. I need a lawyer. A very good, very discreet one. The warmth in her voice was instantly replaced by professional concern. Linda, what's happened? Sarah and I had been roommates in college, back when she was a fiery law student and I was a wide-eyed paralegal student. We had drifted apart as lives do, but I had followed her career from a distance. She had become one of Seattle's most feared divorce attorneys, known for her meticulous preparation and merciless cross-examinations. She was exactly the ally I needed. It's a long story, I said, my voice low. The short version is that Tom is having an affair with our daughter-in-law, and they've set up a shell corporation to steal our house and assets. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I could almost hear the gears turning in her brilliant legal mind. When she spoke again, her voice was cold steel. The bastards. Okay, Linda, don't say another word to anyone. Don't confront them. Don't change your behavior in any way. Are you in a safe place to talk? Yes, I'm at the park. Good. I want you to come to my office, not the main entrance. There's a back door on the alley off 3rd Avenue. I'll text you the details. Be there at 4 p.m. Bring copies of everything you found. And Linda, from this moment on, you are a client. Do exactly as I say. We are going to bury them. Hanging up the phone, I felt the first glimmer of hope. I was no longer alone in this. I had a partner, a weapon. The rest of the day was a study in deception. I went home and baked a lemon meringue pie, Tom's favorite. When he came home, I smiled and kissed him, the taste of ashes on my lips. He was in a buoyant mood, humming to himself as he poured a glass of wine. His arrogance was my greatest asset. He looked at me and saw a simple, unassuming retiree, a woman concerned with baking and gardening. He had no idea I had just declared war. At 3:30, I told him I was going to my book club meeting. He barely looked up from his newspaper. Have fun, honey. Walking into the back entrance of Sarah's sleek, downtown law firm felt like stepping into another world. It was a world of power, of strategy, of justice. Sarah greeted me with a fierce hug. She looked at me, her sharp eyes taking in my pale face and the dark circles I hadn't been able to hide with makeup. You look like hell, she said bluntly. Let's get to work. For the next 2 hours, I laid out the whole sordid story, from the text messages to the financial documents. I handed her the flash drive containing the photos I'd taken. She listened intently, her expression hardening with every detail. She spread the printed photos of the documents across her large mahogany desk, her finger tracing the lines of legal text. This is good, she murmured, her voice a low growl. This is incredibly stupid on their part. Using her maiden name? Setting up the LLC in this state? It's sloppy. He thinks you're a fool. Linda, that's the mistake every arrogant man makes. She looked up at me, her eyes blazing. So, here's what we do. We let them walk deeper into the trap. You're going to need more than just financial records. You're going to need undeniable, irrefutable proof of the affair. Something that will not only win you the divorce case, but will destroy their reputation so thoroughly they'll never recover. I want you to get cameras. Linda, audio and video. Your house is your territory. It's time to start mapping their downfall. The idea of planting cameras in my own home, the sanctuary I had so lovingly curated, felt like a deep and personal violation. But Sarah was right. My home was no longer a sanctuary, it was a battleground. And if I was going to win this war, I needed to have eyes and ears everywhere. My grief had been replaced by a cold, methodical purpose. I was a general preparing her field of battle. The next day, I drove to an electronics store in a neighboring town where no one would know me. I walked the aisles, feeling a strange mix of fear and empowerment. I was a 62-year-old retired teacher, and I was shopping for spy equipment. I bought 3 small high-definition cameras, the kind that are easily disguised as everyday objects, a digital clock for the master bedroom, a phone charger for the living room, and a smoke detector for Tom's study. They were expensive, but I paid in cash from a small emergency fund I had kept hidden for years, a rainy day fund my mother had insisted I create. It was pouring. Installing them was the most nerve-wracking experience of my life. I waited until I was certain Tom and Rachel were both occupied for several hours. My heart hammered against my ribs with every step. The digital clock was easy. I simply replaced the old one on Tom's nightstand. The phone charger was even simpler, plugged into the wall near the armchair where they often sat together, whispering when they thought I was upstairs napping. The smoke detector in the study was the hardest. I had to get up on a stepladder, my hands shaking as I swapped it with the existing one. Every creak of the house sounded like an approaching footstep. I kept picturing Tom walking in, his face contorting from confusion to rage. But he didn't. I finished the job, my hands covered in a thin film of dust and sweat. Then, I waited. It was an agonizing kind of waiting. I had to continue my performance, pretending that nothing was wrong. I watched them from across the dinner table, a pleasant smile fixed on my face, knowing that my silent digital spies were now standing guard. I felt a grim satisfaction in their ignorance. They would move through my house, believing it was their future kingdom, while all along, its very walls were conspiring against them. The first pieces of evidence came within 48 hours. I would check the footage on my laptop late at night, locked in the guest bedroom, my headphones on. Seeing them together in my home, on my screen, was like swallowing glass. They would wait until they thought I was asleep, and then Rachel would slip out of the guest room she shared with Michael on their frequent visits and go to Tom in the living room. I watched them on the worn armchair, the one I'd called back to in my memories, my sacred space now desecrated. I watched them kiss, their hands roaming over each other with a desperate familiarity. But it was their words that cut the deepest. The cameras picked up their hushed conversations with perfect clarity. "She's getting more forgetful," Tom said one night, swirling a glass of brandy. "She asked me this morning if I'd paid the water bill, even though I told her yesterday I had. It's sad, really, but it will make things easier when we have to get her to sign the final papers." "We're doing her a favor, in a way," Rachel replied, her voice smooth as venom. She traced a finger along his jaw. "She won't be able to manage this big house on her own for much longer. We'll make sure she's comfortable in a nice, small apartment." They weren't just betraying me. They were actively plotting my decline, framing their greed as concern. They were building a narrative of my incompetence to justify their theft. Each recorded conversation, each stolen kiss, was another nail in their coffin. I downloaded every file, cataloging them meticulously by date and time, creating a separate, password-protected folder for each camera. I was no longer just collecting evidence for a divorce. I was building a case for the complete and utter demolition of their lives. The web was woven. Now, all I had to do was wait for the flies to become hopelessly entangled. Weeks turned into a month, and my house became a pressure cooker of unspoken truths. My act of the frail, slightly confused wife was so convincing that Tom and Rachel grew bolder, more reckless. Their arrogance was a blinding sun, and they were too busy basking in its warmth to see the shadows where I was watching. They believed their own narrative, that I was fading, a relic of a bygone era, making their takeover not just a desire, but a necessity. Their carelessness became my most powerful weapon. They stopped bothering to go to hotels, believing their hushed encounters in my living room were safe. They began discussing the financial details more openly, convinced I was either out of earshot or too muddled to comprehend. The camera disguised as a phone charger became the star witness in my silent trial. One evening, as I was supposedly upstairs taking a bath, I watched the live feed on my tablet, the steam from the tub fogging the screen. "The final transfer from the joint savings will happen next week," Tom said, his voice confident. "That's the last big piece. Once that's in the LLC account, we can proceed with the house. I have the papers ready for her to sign. I'll tell her it's to protect the assets for Michael's inheritance." "And what about Michael?" Rachel asked. It was the first time I'd heard a hint of concern in her voice, but it wasn't for her husband. It was for their plan. "He's going to ask questions when he finds out his mother is living in a condo in Bellevue." Tom laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Michael will do what I tell him to do. He's always been a mama's boy, but he respects my financial judgment. We'll tell him Linda wanted to downsize, that the house was too much for her. We'll frame it as our being the dutiful children, taking the burden off her hands. He'll buy it. He always does." To hear my son spoken of with such dismissive contempt as a pawn to be manipulated was a unique and terrible pain. They weren't just destroying me, they were poised to destroy his faith in everyone he loved. That recording was the crown jewel of my collection. It wasn't just proof of their scheme, it was a testament to their character, or lack thereof. My nightly routine now consisted of downloading the day's footage, labeling it with cold, precise titles. Living room, financial conspiracy. Bedroom, evidence of adultery. Study, contempt for son. I sent the most damning clips to Sarah in encrypted files. Her replies were always brief and encouraging. "This is gold, Linda," or "They are hanging themselves with their own rope." As my library of their deceit grew, so did my resolve. The plan for my revenge began to take shape, moving beyond a simple legal victory. I didn't just want my assets back. I wanted to strip them of the one thing they valued more than money, their reputation. Tom was a respected former businessman in our community, a man known for his integrity. Rachel was the beautiful, devoted wife and a rising star in her marketing firm. Their lives were built on a carefully constructed facade of respectability. I decided I would be the one to bulldoze it. The perfect opportunity presented itself in the mail one morning, a reminder from a catering company we'd used in the past. Our 40th wedding anniversary was just 6 weeks away. It was sickeningly, beautifully perfect. Tom had, of course, forgotten. When I mentioned it to him that evening, feigning a wistful sadness, he jumped on the idea, seeing it as the perfect cover. "A party," he declared, his eyes lighting up with a false enthusiasm that I could now see so clearly. "Yes, a huge one. We'll invite all our friends. It will be a celebration of our life together." I saw the calculation in his eyes. A big, public celebration would be the final stroke in his portrait of a devoted husband, making the subsequent downsizing of his frail wife seem all the more compassionate. "Oh, Tom, That would be wonderful, I said, allowing a tear to well in my eye. It might be the last big party I have the energy for. He patted my hand, his touch feeling like a spider crawling on my skin. Nonsense, darling, we'll handle everything. You just rest. Oh, I would let them handle the catering and the guest list, but I would be handling the evening's entertainment. The 6 weeks leading up to the party were a masterclass in psychological warfare, a war fought with canapes and calligraphy. Tom and Rachel threw themselves into the planning with a fervor that was almost comical. They saw the party as their coronation, the final public display of the loving family they were about to dismantle. For me, it was the meticulous staging of an execution. They chose the caterer, the florist, the string quartet. I merely nodded my approval, offering gentle, tired suggestions. "Oh, that sounds lovely, dear," I would say to Rachel as she showed me swatches for tablecloths. "You have such wonderful taste." Each compliment was a small, sharp stone I was adding to the pile that would eventually bury them. My own preparations were far more discreet. I worked with Sarah to issue the invitations. The guest list was a strategic document. We invited all of their closest friends, their most important business associates, the pillars of our community whose respect they craved. We invited Tom's golf buddies and Rachel's colleagues. We invited my family, and crucially, Rachel's parents, a kindly, decent couple who adored me and believed their daughter was a saint. And, of course, our son Michael would be there, the guest of honor at his parents' celebration, completely unaware he was also a victim. The invitations themselves were a work of art, thick cream cardstock with gold embossed lettering. "Linda and Tom Harper request the pleasure of your company to celebrate 40 years of marriage." Each one I addressed felt like a summons. They were not invitations to a party, but subpoenas to witness a judgment. My main project was the evening's main event, the video. I spent hours upon hours in the guest room, hunched over my laptop with video editing software that Sarah's firm had provided a paralegal to teach me how to use. It was painstaking work. I sifted through dozens of hours of footage, selecting the most damning clips. I became a filmmaker, a storyteller of my own tragedy. The final cut was a masterpiece of emotional devastation. It started gently, with old photos of Tom and me, of Michael as a child, set to the music of our wedding song. It was the story of the life they were destroying. Then, the music would scratch to a halt. The screen would go black, and then the first clip would play, a crystal-clear shot of Tom and Rachel kissing in our living room. I wove the narrative carefully. The stolen kisses, the whispered endearments, their mocking dismissal of me. And then, the finale, their detailed conversation about the Shell Corporation, about transferring the house, about my fading mental state and how to handle Michael. I didn't add any commentary. I didn't need to. Their own words, their own actions, were the most powerful indictment. The final shot of the 10-minute film was a close-up of the fraudulent estate planning document, with their signatures clearly visible, a week before the party. Sarah and I met for a final strategy session. She had prepared all the necessary legal documents, a motion for divorce on the grounds of adultery and fraud, a petition for an immediate, temporary restraining order to freeze all their assets, including the West Coast Holdings account, a formal complaint that would be filed with the state bar against the lawyer who had drafted the documents. "The moment that video ends," Sarah instructed, her voice calm and firm, "I will stand up. You will hand me a copy of the flash drive in front of everyone. I will announce that I am your legal counsel and that criminal and civil proceedings will commence immediately. There will be no escape." The night before the party, I stood in the backyard, looking at the large white tent that had been erected on the lawn. String lights twinkled like malevolent stars. It was all set. The stage was built, the actors were ready, and the audience was on its way. I felt a profound, chilling calm. They thought they were celebrating 40 years of a lie. In reality, they were attending the funeral of their own lives, and I was the one who would be delivering the eulogy. The evening of the party was a perfect coastal summer night, the air soft and scented with salt and roses from my garden. Our home glowed, filled with the murmur of conversation and the elegant music of the string quartet, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress. I moved through the crowd, a gracious hostess accepting congratulations and compliments. I smiled, I laughed, I played my part to perfection. Tom was in his element, holding court by the bar, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, the very picture of a distinguished gentleman. Rachel was radiant in a shimmering emerald green dress, flitting from group to group, her laughter bright and artificial. They occasionally caught my eye across the crowded room and gave me a small, patronizing smile, the kind one gives to a child who has behaved well. They had no idea they were lambs smiling at their butcher. My son Michael arrived, and my heart ached for him. He hugged me tightly. "You look beautiful. Mom, 40 years. It's incredible." He was so proud, so full of love. The guilt of what I was about to put him through was a sharp physical pain, but it was a necessary surgery. The cancer of this deceit had to be cut out, no matter how painful the procedure. Sarah was there, of course, blending in seamlessly. She gave me a single, sharp nod from across the lawn, her presence a reassuring anchor in the sea of smiling, oblivious faces. After an hour of mingling, Tom tapped a glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. He wrapped an arm around my waist, his touch making my skin crawl. He gave a beautiful speech, full of well-worn anecdotes and charming lies. He talked about our long and happy marriage, about my unwavering support, my grace, my beauty. He called me his rock. The hypocrisy was so thick I could barely breathe. The crowd applauded warmly. He turned to me, his eyes shining. "And now, I think my lovely wife wants to say a few words." This was it. The moment had arrived. I stepped forward, my hand steady as I took the microphone. "Thank you, Tom," I said, my voice clear and calm, projecting across the silent lawn. "That was a beautiful performance." A few people chuckled, thinking I was making a joke. 40 years is a long time. I continued, my eyes scanning the crowd, meeting the faces of our friends, our family. It's a lifetime of shared memories. People think they know a story, a marriage. They see the surface, the anniversaries, the smiling pictures, but they rarely see what's underneath. I gestured towards the large projection screen that had been set up to show a slideshow of old family photos. Tom and I have built so much together. A family, a life, a home. And in honor of that, I've put together a little film of my own, a tribute to our 40 years, a look at the real foundation of our family. I saw a flicker of confusion on Tom's face, a hint of unease in Rachel's eyes. With a small remote in my hand, I pressed play. The screen lit up with the sentimental photos. Just as I'd planned, our wedding song played. I could feel the crowd relax, settling in for a sweet, nostalgic trip down memory lane. Tom put his arm back around me. "Oh, Linda," he whispered, "this is lovely." And then the music screeched to a halt. The screen went black. A collective gasp went through the audience. And then the living room camera's footage appeared, crystal clear, 10 feet high. Tom and Rachel, kissing passionately. The silence on the lawn was absolute, a deafening void of shock. People stared, frozen, their wine glasses paused halfway to their lips. I watched Tom's face, the color drained from it, his smile frozen and then crumbling into a mask of pure horror. Rachel looked like she had been turned to stone, her eyes wide with disbelief and terror. The video played on, clip after merciless clip. Their whispers, their plans, their contempt for me, their strategy to steal my home, all of it broadcast for everyone they knew to hear. Rachel's parents were in the front row, her mother's hand flying to her mouth, her father's face a thunderous mask of fury. Michael stood rigid, his face pale, his eyes locked on the screen, watching the complete, undeniable betrayal by his wife and his father. When the final image of the fraudulent document appeared on screen, I clicked the remote. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than anything I had ever experienced. It was the sound of two lives, two reputations, being utterly and irrevocably annihilated into that crushing, deafening silence. I spoke again, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "And that," I said, turning to face my husband and daughter-in-law, "is the truth of our 40 years. Tom stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. His face, which had been a healthy, ruddy tan, was now a pasty, sickly gray. Rachel had started to tremble violently, her eyes darting around at the sea of horrified faces as if looking for an escape that didn't exist. She saw no sympathy, only disgust and condemnation. As planned. Sarah Jensen stepped forward from the crowd, her expression grim and professional. She walked directly to me. In a deliberately loud and formal gesture, I held out the small flash drive containing the video. "Ms. Jensen," I said, my voice ringing with authority. "Here's the evidence." Sarah took it. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper." She then turned to face the stunned audience, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Sarah Jensen. I am Linda Harper's legal counsel. What you have just witnessed is evidence in a forthcoming legal proceeding." She turned her sharp gaze on Tom and Rachel, who flinched as if struck. "Thomas Harper, you will be served with divorce papers tomorrow morning on the grounds of extreme fraud and adultery. Rachel Harper, you will be named as a co-respondent. A motion has been filed for an immediate freeze of all personal and corporate assets, including those of a shell company named West Coast Holdings, LLC. Any attempt to move or liquidate assets will be considered a criminal offense." Each word was a hammer blow. The crowd, which had been frozen in shock, began to murmur, the sound growing into a low roar of outrage. People were turning their backs on Tom and Rachel, literally moving away from them as if they were contagious. Rachel's father, a big, imposing man, took a step towards Tom, his fists clenched, his face purple with rage, before his wife held him back, her own face streaked with tears. The storm had broken. Tom finally found his voice, a pathetic, strangled rasp. "Linda, how could you? This is a private matter." "You made it my business when you conspired to leave me destitute," I replied, my voice devoid of any emotion except a chilling finality. "You made it everyone's business when you built your reputation on a lie. You wanted a party to celebrate your life? Well, this is it. This is your legacy." Chaos erupted. The string quartet had packed up and fled. Guests were leaving in droves, casting looks of pity at me and utter revulsion at Tom and Rachel. Michael, my son, hadn't moved. He was still staring at the blank screen, his expression one of hollowed-out devastation. I went to him, my heart breaking for him all over again. I put a hand on his arm. He flinched, then looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it was bottomless. "Mom," he whispered, "is all of it true?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly. "I'm so sorry." He didn't say another word. He simply turned and walked away from his wife, away from his father, and disappeared into the night. That, more than anything, was the sound of their world ending. Rachel finally broke, letting out a choked sob and running towards the house. Tom stood alone on the perfectly manicured lawn, amidst the elegant white chairs and wilting flowers, a king deposed in his own court. His friends, his associates, the people whose respect he had cultivated for a lifetime, were gone. Sarah's associate was already there, handing him a card. "You're going to need a lawyer," he said, not unkindly. I stood there for a long moment, watching the wreckage. There was no joy, no triumph, just a vast empty sense of justice served. I had burned their world to the ground, just as I had promised myself I would, and from the ashes, I had to begin building my own. The weeks and months that followed the party were a blur of legal proceedings, but with the evidence I had gathered, the outcome was never in doubt. The video, which the media gleefully dubbed the anniversary annihilation, went viral in our local community. Tom and Rachel were social pariahs. They were tried and convicted in the court of public opinion long before a judge ever banged a gavel. Tom's legal fight was short-lived and pathetic. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud, his lawyers advised him to settle. I got everything. The house, the full share of our marital assets, and a significant portion of his pension. The West Coast Holdings, LLC, was dissolved, its funds transferred back to me. He was forced to sell his precious stocks and retirement properties to pay for it all. I didn't just win. I took back every single thing he had tried to steal from me, with interest. He was left a broken, disgraced man, forced to live in a small, rented apartment on the far side of town. Rachel fared no better. Her parents disowned her. Her company fired her, citing a morals clause in her contract, and Michael, my heartbroken son, filed for divorce the day after the party. Their marriage was annulled on the grounds of fraud. The last I heard, she had moved back to her hometown in the Midwest, a pariah with a name no one wanted to be associated with. They had gambled everything for a future together, and in one 10-minute video, they had lost it all. For me, the victory was quiet. Reclaiming my house was not a celebration, but a purification. I walked through the rooms, no longer a ghost, but the rightful owner. The first thing I did was hire a company to come and take away nearly all the furniture. I threw out the armchair, the bed I had shared with a stranger, the dining table where we had told so many lies over so many meals. I cleansed the house of their presence, of the tainted memories. Slowly, I began to rebuild. Michael and I began the long, painful process of healing. It was difficult for him, learning to separate his love for the father he remembered from the man he now knew his father to be. But our bond, forged in a shared betrayal, became stronger than ever. We rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty and resilience, living alone in the big, quiet house. I realized my journey wasn't over. My pain had given me a purpose. I sold the house. It held too many ghosts, and used the substantial proceeds to start a new chapter. I went back to school, updated my paralegal credentials, and then did something I had only dreamed of. I opened a nonprofit legal resource center, the Harper Center for Women's Justice. Its mission was simple: to provide affordable legal advice and support for women over 50 who were facing betrayal, fraud, and divorce. Women like me. Women who were told they were too old, too fragile, too trusting. Women who were in danger of being erased. My life was no longer defined by a man or a marriage. It was defined by the strength I had found in my darkest hour, and the work I was now doing to help other women find theirs. I had lost a husband, but I had found myself. They had tried to steal my house, but in the end, I had built a home for hundreds of other women who needed a sanctuary. I had not just reclaimed a life, I had forged a new one, stronger and more meaningful than anything I had lost. The sea air is cool on my face as I stand on the balcony of my new, smaller apartment overlooking the Sound. The rage is gone, replaced by a quiet, settled peace. For a long time, I thought home was a place, a collection of 4 walls filled with furniture and photographs. I learned that home is not a place you live, but a truth you live by. It's the foundation of self-respect, integrity, and the strength to stand up for yourself, even when you're standing alone. My old life was a beautiful porcelain vase, but it was hollow. This new life is made of something stronger, something forged in fire. It's not as delicate, perhaps, but it will never, ever shatter. Have you ever had to find a strength you didn't know you had in a moment of profound betrayal? What does the word home truly mean to you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories give strength to us all. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more tales of justice and resilience. Thank you for listening.